Thank you. I'll now recognize members for 5 minutes for questions, and we'll begin with Chairman Westerman. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bentz, and thank you again to the witnesses for being here today. A lot of familiar faces. Dr. Williams, in 2013, you co-authored an article with other Obama administration officials, and in that article, you stated that critical habitat designations have, quote, have very little impact from a conservation perspective. I and my colleagues have been encouraged or have been engaged in a bipartisan effort under the CRA to reverse the service's rescission of habitat definition. This definition limits designations to areas that can actually support species, which is in line with the article that you helped author in 2013. So given your views on the limited conservation benefit of critical habitat, it seems that the work the service is doing under your leadership not only contradicts the views expressed in the article, but also alienates landowners and distracts from recovering species. So in that same article, you also noted that making controversial regulatory decisions like critical habitat designations before considering how best to recover species results in missed opportunities to promote recovery, which I agree with that. So what policy reforms are needed for the service to focus on recovery planning first and avoid the, quote, fire, aim, ready problem that you identified in that article?
Chairman Bentz, Chairman Westerman, thank you for that question. First off, I did write that article. I did not write that article in my official capacity, and especially not in my capacity as the director of the Fish and Wildlife Service. I think that critical habitat designation is quite misunderstood, and sometimes we hang our hats on it when really the heart of the endangered species lies elsewhere. Section 4 listing, Section 7 consultations, and the like. To answer your question, I think there are a number of layers to this. Yes, I very much agree with you. We're the Fish and Wildlife Service and our sister agency, not so chronically starved in funding. We could put more into recovery planning. Thanks very much to the Inflation Reduction Act, we are able to now put $62.5 million into recovery planning, and that's very important. But to get to the proposed changes in the critical habitat designation regulation, I don't believe that the last administration's changes were reasoned or moderate, nor were they helpful. What the proposed regulation under this administration does, and I think sometimes it has been mischaracterized, is it finds that very reasoned and steady and the attempt to have a durable solution to critical habitat designation going forward. In fact, when I was the director of the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, I wrote a comment letter in opposition to the previous administration adding a definition of critical habitat into the regulations. So because I didn't think it helped me then as a state director, it hindered. So just to know that the regulations, this administration and under my tenure as director of the Fish and Wildlife Service is meant to be very reasoned and durable and does not change consultations or many of the other issues that people have raised. Nonetheless, I look forward to working with you, Chair Westerman, on these issues that I know you care about very much as well as me.
Thank you. Mr. Wood, what role do private lands and states play in recovering species? And how do the ESA and current regulations make it so that species are a liability to the people who are actually trying to protect them?
Private landowners are the most important conservationists. The Fish and Wildlife Service has found that over 2/3 of species depend on private land for their habitat. And too often, because we lead with regulations rather than recovery planning or on-the-ground conservation efforts, the signal that an ESA listing sends to private landowners is a penalty. That immediately your ability to use your land is restricted by the take prohibition. If your land is designated critical habitat, its value may go down. It is all stick, and it's only later that we start thinking about what the carrot should be to encourage the maintenance and restoration of that habitat.
And we're often told that all we need is more money, just more money to recover species. Why do we need good policy reforms and not just money to make a difference?
Because right now what we're doing is making species and their habitat a liability and then trying to use funding to make up for that. It's sort of like you've dug a hole and then tried to fill it up, when it would be better off to start from a perspective of how do we make species and their habitat an asset at the front end, so we're not having to fix that policy error.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Ranking Member Huffman for 5 minutes.